Young Thug walked out of the longest criminal trial in Georgia history with one job: stay free.
Atlanta in Fulton County. And nobody's saying you should. The idea of you guys should try to stay rich, try to stay free.
In March 2026, Charleston White says Young Thug walked up on him at Drusky's Miami reunion with his crew and put a 20-year prison sentence on the line to do it.
We putting your jail, boy. You ain't finna run around here still representing King Slime with 40 years probation.
This is what happened when Young Thug attacked Charleston White in court. The attack. Charleston White had been putting Young Thug on trial for months, not in a real courtroom, but on the internet. He had built a case, he had made arguments, he had delivered verdicts.
Order in court. Jeffrey.
He had even called witnesses.
Sit your lank ass down. Long girl boy, gangster, tough.
For months, White had been the judge, the prosecutor, the bailiff, and the loudest voice in the room. And for months, Young Thug had taken it, or appeared to. Then came the weekend of March 28, 29, 2026. Drusky, the comedian, hosted a reunion event in Miami. It was called the Coulda Been Love 2. Both men were there. Young Thug had been out of prison since October 2024, on probation following his guilty plea in the YSL Ryko case. Charleston White had been at his usual post, publicly calling Thug a rat and a fraud on every platform he could access. At some point that weekend, Young Thug and a group of his associates found Charleston White at the event and approached him. White says he was alone when they came.
They ain't ready for that, mate. They hold on. Man, hoe ass approach me now. Catch the foot.
White went straight to the camera afterward and broke down what was said.
Jeffrey Williams, let me explain something to you. You on probation, right? You just approached me, threatening me. Your words was, we step on.
That phrase, we step on, is what White locked onto, not just as a threat, but as evidence, because Thug did not say I, he said we.
Okay, you didn't say I, you made it plural. You said we, so that's in cohorts, I mean a gang. You on probation.
Young Thug's probation conditions include an outright ban on any association with criminal street gang members. White's argument, the word we in that context, is exactly that kind of association in action. But the gang language was only the first issue. Then came the gun. White says one of the associates in Thug's group was visibly armed.
Then you had a fellow with you that was possessing a gun. You are not supposed to be around with people that had guns.
He described that associate.
Eyewitness, along with other witnesses, saw your friend with a short body with the fat, pudgy stomach that hangs above or over his waistline like a kangaroo pouch.
Then came what that associate said while clutching it.
The fat mother clutching the gun. His exact words is, I assumed it was a gun, I think it was a gun, I believe it was a gun.
White then made the legal argument in real time, connecting what he saw to what it means under the law.
Right? That makes it aggravated assault. His words was, don't lose your life in her.
White's response to all of it was the mace.
I proceeded to brandish the mace and pull out the mace and say, you to get maced.
Other people stepped between them. The physical part ended, but the psychological impact, according to White, did not.
When they say we step on I was waiting for the lights to go out. I'm not.
He was not done unpacking what that moment felt like.
When that walked in front of my face and say we step on I knew I was finna see the Lord next.
White also says the location of the confrontation was not just Drusky's venue. He claims the event was on or near Federal Aviation Administration property, a private airport. If true, that detail does not just change the setting of the story, it changes the jurisdiction. A threat issued on FAA property does not stay at the local police precinct. It goes federal. White says he has photos of every person who was in Thug's group that night. He says he has video. He says he has witnesses. And starting from the moment the confrontation ended, he made one thing clear.
Yeah, no business bother me, but you got the right one, Jeffrey.
The right one. Because Charleston White was not about to fight back on the street. He was about to fight back in the system. And he knew exactly how to do it. The legal machine. Charleston White does not handle threats the way most people in hip-hop handle threats. He does not put out a diss track. He does not call his people. He does not slide. Charleston White calls his attorney, documents everything with the precision of someone who has studied the legal system from the inside, and then goes straight to the one institution that everyone in Thug's world fears most, law enforcement. Before the weekend was even over, White was already broadcasting his next move, and it was not a threat. It was a step-by-step breakdown of exactly how he was going to dismantle young Thug's freedom.
I'm gonna contact my attorney. First thing Monday morning, we will be going to the courts to file a restraining order against you for my protection.
And that was just the state-level play. White had a federal angle ready too.
Not only that, I will be contacting the federal authorities because you made a threat while possessing a gun on federal property, a private airport.
Monday, March 30th, 2026, White posted a photo of himself standing in front of a police station on Instagram. The caption, "I promise you, Jeffrey going back to jail for probation violation." This was not a vague threat. This was a man who had already thought through the legal architecture of what he was building. White laid out his multi-pronged strategy: file a police report and press charges for terroristic threats, with the potential for federal involvement due to the FAA property claim. Seek a restraining order against Young Thug. Contact Young Thug's probation officer directly. Send footage to Fulton County DA Fonnie Willis. Report the alleged probation violations, specifically the threats and the armed associate, to the people with actual authority to act on them. But White did not stop at filing. He went on camera and walked his audience through the procedural mechanics of how a probation violation actually moves through the system, because he understood them.
This is a process. The people can't just jump the process and go off what I'm saying online. They gotta wait for this to get put into the system.
White understood how the pipeline actually works, and he kept going.
Once they get put into the system, the people have to do a small, somewhat of a procedural investigation. After they do the procedural investigation,
this is where the legal precision becomes genuinely dangerous for Thug. White was not just venting, he was outlining a real sequence. The report goes in. The investigation happens, then the paperwork travels from Miami, where Thug's probation had been transferred, back to Fulton County, Atlanta, where the original plea and sentencing judge sits.
Then they have to take care of her in open locker, contact the people down at the probation department down here in Miami.
The trail does not stop in Miami. It travels back to where the sentence originated.
Because he got his probation transferred down here. Then they got to send the paperwork back to Atlanta, Fulton County.
White understood something that most people watching this as entertainment did not. Probation officers have very broad discretion. A credible report, especially one accompanied by video footage, witness accounts, and photographs of the people Thug was with, does not require a criminal conviction to trigger a revocation hearing. It requires only the probation officer's determination that there is sufficient basis to proceed, and White was making that basis as thick as possible. Then came the restraining order strategy, which White identified as the move that would truly shake the system.
Before I leave and I go hit him with the restraining order, that's what's going to shake the probation department.
The restraining order is the move that would formalize White's fear, turning a social media claim into a court document. Once a judge signs a restraining order, any violation of it becomes a separate criminal offense on top of the existing probation conditions. It creates a second legal ring around Thug, tighter than the first. White also made the Fonnie Willis connection explicit. He mentioned her name with a kind of savoring satisfaction, as if he knew that the very mention of her office, the office that had originally prosecuted the YSL RICO case, would land differently than any other threat.
Jeffrey King Slime finna slime your ass right into Fannie Willis' hands. She already done tried to get you revoked.
She already done tried to get you revoked. That line is a reference to April 2025, when prosecutors sought revocation over a deleted social media post that allegedly targeted a witness. The judge declined that time, but the framework for revocation was already established. White was handing Fonnie Willis's office a new set of facts on a fresh case.
Guess what I'm finna do? Get you a revocation hearing.
As of April 1st, 2026, no official charges, arrests, or confirmed probation violations had been reported against Young Thug as a result of this incident. But the gears White described, the procedural machinery of reporting, investigating, and transferring paperwork, were already in motion. And the reason those gears are so dangerous is what was written into Thug's sentence on October 31st, 2024. The tightrope. When Young Thug pleaded guilty on October 31st, 2024, he walked out of custody the same day he walked into that courtroom, technically free, his face finally exposed to daylight after over 2 years in pretrial detention. But the terms of what he walked out into were, by any measure, one of the most suffocating legal arrangements ever handed to a major rap artist in American history. The sentence was 40 years total. The first 5 were commuted to time served. Then came 15 years of probation. And looming behind all of that, silent, dormant, but fully alive, was a 20-year backloaded prison sentence. Not a possibility, not a threat, a sentence, already written, already signed, waiting. If probation is revoked for any material violation, those 20 years activate. Young Thug does not go back to county. He goes back for 2 decades. This is what Charleston White was pointing at when he started making calls. The probation terms themselves read like a document designed to surgically remove every element of Young Thug's identity. First, the 10-year ban from Metro Atlanta, not the city, the entire metro region as defined by the U.S. Census Bureau, the place where YSL was born, where his label operates, where his family lives, where his career was built from nothing. He was given 2 days to leave after sentencing. He cannot return except for narrowly defined emergencies involving immediate family, weddings, funerals, graduations, medical crises, and even then, only briefly. After 3 clean years of probation, he may earn the right to visit Atlanta up to 4 times a year, for up to 2 weeks each time, provided no violations occur. Second, 4 live anti-gang presentations per year to be delivered in person at grade schools, middle schools, boys and girls clubs, and similar youth organizations. These are not optional media appearances or Instagram posts. They are mandatory, in-person, in Atlanta visits that serve the dual purpose of community service and public atonement. Third, and most directly relevant to the Drusky event, the prohibition on any association with criminal street gang members. 2 exceptions were carved out with surgical specificity, his brother Unfunk and Gunna, but only as long as Gunna remains contractually tied to YSL Records. Everyone else in the YSL orbit, every co-defendant, every affiliate, every face attached to that world is off limits. And then came the clause that turns a scene like the Drusky event into a live grenade. No promotion of gangs in any form, no gang references in music, no gang signs, no gang language, no representation of criminal street gang activity in any way, shape, or form. If "we step on" shit registers as a gang reference in the ears of a probation officer reviewing a video, that is not a gray area. That is a direct violation of a written term of his release. Add to that the standard felon conditions: no firearms, including being in the presence of them. Random warrantless searches of his person, home, and vehicle at any time. Random drug testing. Full compliance with every law, everywhere, at all times. The Drusky confrontation, as Charleston White described it, touched at least 3 of those conditions simultaneously: the gang association clause, the armed associate clause, and the threat constituting a new crime clause. The location on what White claims was FAA property would add a 4th dimension: federal jurisdiction.
2 things you can't do: stop me from going to the police and unscare me. Yeah, once you scare me, you can't unscare me. And say, showed up musty with $1 million chain around his neck.
The chain around Thug's neck, the chain around his wrist in the form of a 20-year sentence. The irony, rich, cruel, and entirely of his own construction, is that the man who was handed what legal observers called an unusually lenient outcome, given the gravity of the RICO charges, now faced the possibility of losing it all, not to a new indictment, not to a new trial, but to a confrontation at a Comedians Miami reunion event. This is the tightrope. There is no net.
Atlanta in Fulton County. And nobody's saying you should. The idea of you guys should try to stay rich, try to stay free.
Those words were spoken by DJ Academics, who was watching the situation unfold in real time and recognized what it meant. That second chance, the one Young Thug was given after more than 2 years locked up while the longest criminal trial in Georgia history ground on around him, was now being dangled over the edge by the weight of one weekend in Miami. The rat race. To understand why Young Thug was at that event at all, why he apparently could not let Charleston White operate unchallenged, you have to understand what White had been saying about him for the past year, because this confrontation was not a spontaneous eruption. It was the collision point of a months-long campaign by Charleston White to strip every layer of street credibility from Young Thug's name, and the ammunition White was using was not fabricated. It came from a police interrogation room in 2015. In the summer of 2025, audio from a roughly 2-hour voluntary police interview resurfaced and went massively viral. In that 2015 recording, Young Thug sat down with Atlanta detectives to discuss the shooting at Lil Wayne's tour bus, and during that conversation, he named a YSL affiliate, Pee Wee Roscoe, real name Jimmy Winfrey, in connection with selling weed to Lil Wayne and implied knowledge about the incident. He offered his phone number to continue the conversation. He kept talking. Charleston White heard the audio and reacted the way he reacts to everything, without a filter and without hesitation.
The hip-hop industry is quiet. I'm not finna be quiet. I've been on you ass. Listen, I done got back focused.
White's argument was not complicated. Young Thug had spent months publicly castigating Gunna for taking an Alford plea in the YSL RICO case in December 2022, a move that let Gunna affirm enough in court for a sentence while not fully admitting guilt and without testifying against anyone. Thug had amplified the Gunna is a rat narrative in interviews and on social media. He even put it in music. And now here was a recording of Thug himself, voluntarily, in a police interrogation room, naming a name. White called it dry snitching. He mocked Thug for knowing his Miranda rights and talking anyway. He called him a hypocrite of the highest order. He framed the entire YSL RICO case as a consequence of Thug's own willingness to engage with law enforcement when it suited him. Thug pushed back on social media. He posted that the interrogation was never used in court against him because it showed him helping his brada, not harming them. He called the narrative distorted. He released a diss track called Closing Arguments, targeting people he considered the real rats, including YSL affiliates Woody and Yak Gotti, while reinforcing his own death before dishonor positioning. Pee Wee Roscoe himself, the man Thug had named in the audio, publicly defended Thug, saying his comments were the kind of non-committal talk expected in an interrogation room, and that Thug was clean from a snitching standpoint. But White also brought out what he claimed was paperwork, court documents from the YSL RICO trial that he said showed Thug had provided information to police around age 17 in connection with a murder case. Thug's defense team had contested this during the trial, arguing that a detective had misrepresented statements made in the back of a police car, but the documents existed. White had them, and he was using them. In his mock courtroom, the one he had been running for months online, White played both judge and prosecutor.
He didn't go up against Fannie Willis. It's a gang unit detective.
White's point, Brian Steele, Thug's own defense attorney, had reportedly told Thug not to take the plea. Even the people on Thug's side had given him the right advice. He didn't take it.
Jeffrey, why didn't you listen to that white boy?
The deep, gnawing irony of all of it, the detail that makes this feud something more than just a rap beef, is what Charleston White says about himself. He does not deny snitching. He has never denied it. He was convicted of first-degree murder as a 14-year-old in Tarrant County, Texas, and during his subsequent interactions with authorities, he cooperated. He has said it on camera, on podcasts, and in YouTube videos. He has embraced the label. He wears it like armor.
And he also came to them and said, hey, I'm a snitch.
White was talking about himself, out loud, on camera, without flinching.
I snitched on somebody before, but it ain't no paperwork.
He was a juvenile. He was 14 years old, and he had a context for it. White's position,
but I snitched when I was a kid. I snitched when I was a little bitty boy when I didn't know the rules. I didn't know no better.
is that his honesty immunizes him. He is not a hypocrite, he argues, because he has never claimed to be anything other than what he is. The hypocrisy, in his framing, belongs entirely to Thug, who built an empire on a death before dishonor brand while allegedly doing the exact thing he condemned others for doing. The fact that White openly describes himself as someone who will contact police, who will call probation officers, who will file restraining orders, who will send footage to district attorneys, is not a vulnerability in his position. It is the entire point of his position. He has been telegraphing his playbook for years. Young Thug walked directly into it.
No felony convictions. Never been to prison. Never shot a gun at a. Never committed a crime in a black neighborhood.
He kept going, completing the list.
Never sold drugs to black people. Never raped nobody. Never molested nobody. Never done harm to nobody in the community.
White is talking about himself, building his own defense for why his legal threats are legitimate, and his standing to make them is unimpeachable. It is absurd, it is theatrical, and it is entirely coherent within his framework. He has fashioned himself into the one figure in hip-hop who cannot be silenced by the threat of being called a rat because he announced it first. The reaction. The moment the videos from Drusky's event hit the internet, the response was immediate, layered, and in some quarters, genuinely alarmed. The first major voice to weigh in, and arguably the one whose words carried the most weight in terms of actual street context, was Rollo. The Atlanta rapper, who had his own complicated history with Young Thug and had watched the YSL Rico saga unfold from a particular vantage point, did not express sympathy. He expressed something colder, a kind of bewildered exasperation at the decision-making on display. Rollo posted on Instagram, "Wise men don't start fights that they can't win. Some you just gotta walk past. Only a damn fool would publicly push up on Charleston White." He went further in video, calling White a gangsta's worst nightmare, and making the point that anyone in Thug's position, on probation, with a 20-year backloaded sentence hanging over them, should have the discipline to know what situations to walk away from. He added, only half joking, that he personally did not want White to send Thug back to jail because he would lose trolling material, but the underlying message was unambiguous. This was avoidable, and the decision to engage was, at minimum, a serious miscalculation. DJ Academics reacted on stream with a tone that was less sympathetic and more incredulous.
And I do want to send a PSA and a hopeful warning to Young Thug.
The warning was genuine. Academics was not trolling. He was speaking to the stakes.
Young Thug, we felt bad for you the first time.
Academics acknowledged the sympathy that had existed during the RICO trial, the rallying around Thug, the free Thug energy, the genuine sense in parts of hip-hop that the prosecution had been overzealous. But that sympathy, he said, had a shelf life. Thug had been handed something extraordinarily lenient given what he had been accused of, murder-related RICO charges that had sent other people to prison for life.
But after you've gotten the most lenient sentence we've ever seen,
he unpacked exactly what those charges were, what lenient was measured against.
For the things you were being accused of, which included murder.
Academics then zeroed in on the specific behavior pattern he had been observing. Thug and Lil Baby, he said, had been moving around Miami together like a unit. He called them the Bonnie and Clyde of hip-hop, running with what he described as rent-a-goons and carrying the energy of people who had not internalized what was at stake with their freedom.
I'm giving the warning now, because if he gets into some further trouble, there will be no tears to be had.
No tears to be had. That phrase, from someone who had been a consistent, high-visibility supporter of the Free Thug movement, signals how completely the narrative had shifted. The second chance had been granted. The second chance was now being squandered, and the room for sympathy was closing. Among fans, the response split along lines that reflected exactly the cultural fault lines this entire saga had been exposing for the past year. One camp treated it as obvious, almost darkly comedic. Why, on probation, with 20 years waiting for you, would you approach Charleston White, a man who has told the world repeatedly and in specific detail that he will call police, contact probation officers, and file legal documents against anyone who threatens him? The logic of pressing someone who has built his entire brand around weaponizing the legal system, while you yourself are the most legally vulnerable you have ever been, is the kind of logic that generates memes, and it did. The other camp pushed back on White's narrative itself, pointing out that his account of the incident was entirely one-sided, that public videos of the confrontation showed yelling and a heated exchange rather than clear audio of life-threatening statements, and that White's documented history of inflammatory provocation made him an unreliable narrator. Some asked whether the confrontation was even initiated by Thug, or whether White's months of public attacks had created the conditions for it. Others noted that the gun claim, the most serious element legally, rested entirely on White's description and the testimony of witnesses he claimed to have, with no confirmed independent corroboration in the public record. White's version positions him as the lone, fearless man who stood his ground. The videos circulating online, described in multiple reports as showing mostly verbal confrontation rather than a physical attack, do not cleanly confirm or deny his account of the gun or the specific life-threatening words. What they confirm is that there was a confrontation, that things were heated, and that security got involved. The deeper conversation the entire incident reignited is the one that the YSL RICO case had already cracked open 2 years earlier. What does street code actually mean in an era where probation terms are this precise, RICO statutes are this broad, and the consequences of a single bad night are this catastrophic? Rollo's framing, "some shit you just gotta walk past," is not a celebration of cowardice. It is a practical acknowledgement that the world the YSL RICO case described is not one in which traditional street responses are viable anymore. Charleston White, for his part, kept the pressure building throughout. He posted updates. He described his legal consultations. He named Fonnie Willis again. He said the restraining order would be the instrument that shook the probation department loose.
I hope he's so goddamn happy. He walk around and snitch, put Thug in jail.
And then he described in full what it would feel like to walk through Atlanta knowing he had been the one to put Young Thug back inside.
Them man, they got to go to jail. They walking around scaring innocent people such as myself. Sending them back where they really tough at.
As of April 1st, 2026, no official charges, no arrests, and no confirmed probation violations have been reported against Young Thug in connection with this incident. The legal machinery White described as real, but it is slow. Reports go in, investigations are conducted, paperwork travels between Miami and Fulton County, supervisors review, officers make determinations, judges decide. None of that has produced a public outcome yet, but the ingredients White assembled, a formal police report, claimed video evidence, witness accounts, probation officer notification, and at minimum the framework for a restraining order application, are not nothing. In the context of Young Thug's specific probation structure, where the bar for a revocation hearing is not a criminal conviction, but a credible finding of violation, they are not nothing at all. Young Thug has not publicly addressed the incident directly. His side of the story, whatever it is, has not made it into the public record in any verified form. What has made it into the public record is this: a man who spent over 2 years in pretrial detention, who watched the longest criminal trial in Georgia history collapse around him, who then walked out of a courtroom on Halloween 2024 with 15 years of probation and a 20-year prison sentence that activates the moment he steps wrong. That man, according to Charleston White, walked up on Charleston White at a Drusky event in Miami and said, "We step on shit," and Charleston White picked up his phone.